If someone had told me 6 months ago that the loudest, most obnoxiously confident man I had ever met would become the axis on which my entire world tilted, I would have laughed. Not a real laugh, but the dry, papery sound I reserve for things too absurd to even contemplate. My world was small and quiet and safe. It was built on routine and observation, a fortress of solitude I had meticulously constructed brick by emotional brick. Then Mason moved in. He was my new roommate, a decision born of financial desperation and a misleadingly brief interview. He filled our small apartment with the sheer force of his presence. A whirlwind of loud music, the smell of sawdust and sweat, and a booming laugh that seemed to shake the cheap plaster of our shared walls. I was a ghost in my own home, a quiet, bookish wraith who specialized in the art of disappearance. I would hear his key in the lock, and my entire body would clench, a physical preparation for the coming storm. I'd slide from the living room to my bedroom, a shadow melting into other shadows, my heart a frantic little mouse scurrying for cover. Mason was a carpenter. His body was a testament to his trade, a landscape of broad shoulders and thick arms laced with corded muscle. I was a freelance copy editor. My body was a testament to sitting in a chair for 10 hours a day. We were two different species forced into the same small habitat. My life before him was a meticulously curated collection of beige moments. Wake up, coffee, work, microwave dinner, book, sleep. The predictability was my armor. It kept the world, with all its messy, unpredictable emotions, at a safe and manageable distance. Mason shattered that beige landscape. He brought color, but it was the loud, jarring color of a neon sign buzzing outside a quiet library. He was all primary reds and electric blues, and I was 100 shades of gray. From the fortress of my room, I observed him. It was a habit I couldn't break, the same way I couldn't stop myself from tracing the outlines of words in the air. I watched the way he moved through the kitchen, a study in casual, unthinking grace. He'd lean against the counter, one hip cocked, scrolling through his phone, and the simple posture held a confidence I couldn't begin to comprehend. My fascination was a secret shame. It felt like a betrayal of my own quiet nature, this obsessive cataloging of another person's existence. I knew the scar that bisected his left eyebrow, a faint white line against his tan skin. I knew the way he'd rub the back of his neck when he was tired, his thick fingers pressing into the muscle there. I knew the sound of his sigh when he came home after a long day, a gust of wind that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 planks of wood. He probably thought I was a weirdo, the quiet roommate who never spoke, who left phantom dishes washed in the rack, and whose only proof of existence was the rent check that appeared on the counter on the first of every month. He wasn't wrong. We had a system, unspoken but rigid. He owned the day, the living room, the noise. I owned the night, the quiet corners, the silence. We were planets in separate orbits, held together only by the gravitational pull of a shared lease agreement. The distance was a chasm. He was, by all accounts, aggressively straight. He'd have friends over, other loud, confident men, and sometimes their girlfriends. I'd hear their laughter through my door, a language from a foreign country I would never visit. He was the sun, and I was a creature of the deep, mesmerized by the light, but terrified of its heat. My feelings for him were a buried treasure on a deserted island, a secret I would carry to my grave. Then the power went out, not for an hour, but for a whole weekend. A transformer blew somewhere in the neighborhood, and the city plunged into an unnerving silence. My digital fortress crumbled. No internet, no work, no screen to hide behind. I was in the living room, caught mid-scurry, when the lights flickered and died. We were plunged into the gloomy gray of a late afternoon storm. I froze. Mason was on the couch, and for the first time, we were trapped in the same room, in the same silence. The quiet was different from my usual brand of quiet. It was heavy, thick with the unsaid. I could hear the rain starting to tap against the window pane. I could hear the soft sound of his breathing. "Well," he said, his voice startlingly loud in the stillness. "This is a thing." I just nodded, a useless gesture in the dim light. My throat felt like it was full of sand. He stood up, a large shape moving in the gloom. I flinched, an involuntary tightening of my whole body. He didn't notice. He was already rummaging in a kitchen drawer, the clatter of metal on metal painfully sharp. He produced 2 candles and an old lighter. A few moments later, 2 small flames danced between us, casting our shadows onto the walls like giant, wavering puppets. His face was all angles and flickering gold. He looked ancient, elemental. "Got any plans?" he asked, sitting back down on the couch. It was a simple question, a normal roommate question. To me, it felt like an interrogation. "Plans? My plans are to avoid you until the sun burns out." "No," I managed to say. The word came out as a croak. He stared at me for a long moment. His eyes, usually a bright, easygoing blue, were dark and unreadable in the candlelight. I felt pinned, a butterfly under glass. "This is going to drive me insane," he said, not to me, but to the room. "Stuck in here." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure frustration. "I need to get out." My heart did a slow, painful plummet. Of course. He wanted to escape. He wanted to escape me. "I know a place," he said, and this time he was looking directly at me. The focus of his gaze was a physical weight. "A lake. Up north. It's quiet. No people. We could camp. Get out of the city until the power's back." My mind raced. Camp? With him? The thought was both terrifying and intoxicating. It was a complete demolition of my routine, of my safety. It was everything I was supposed to avoid. "I have a tent," he continued, steamrolling my silence. "Sleeping bags. All the gear. We could leave now. Be there by nightfall." It was an offer, but it felt like a command. "Adare." And some broken, reckless part of me, a part one didn't even know existed, wanted to say yes. The thought of being trapped in this dark, silent apartment with the full force of his restless energy was somehow more terrifying than the wilderness. "Okay," I heard myself say. The word was a stranger in my mouth. Mason's face broke into a grin, a genuine, dazzling smile that lit up the dim room more than the candles ever could. "Yeah? All right. Let's do it. Go pack a bag." And just like that, the world shifted. The careful walls of my fortress crumbled to dust, and I was walking out into the storm with the one person I was most afraid of. The drive was a blur of rain-streaked highways and the low hum of the truck's engine. Mason drove with an easy, one-handed confidence, the cab of his truck a small, warm bubble against the gray world outside. He put on music, some low-key indie band I'd never heard of, and it filled the space between us, so I didn't have to. I stared out the window, watching the city dissolve into suburbs, then into sprawling, green countryside. Every mile we traveled was a mile further from my comfort zone. My stomach was a knot of tightly wound wires. What was I doing? This was a mistake. A catastrophic, system failure level mistake. We arrived as dusk was settling, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. The lake was just as he described it, a sheet of dark, still glass nestled in a thick collar of pine trees. The air smelled of rain and damp earth and pine needles. It was so quiet, a deep, resonant silence that was nothing like the anxious quiet of our apartment. He parked the truck near a small clearing a stone's throw from the water's edge. "Home sweet home," he announced, killing the engine. We worked in near silence, a strange, unspoken rhythm falling into place between us. He pulled the tent and the gear from the truck bed, and I, surprisingly, knew what to do. My father had been an avid camper, a life I had long since shed, but the muscle memory remained. I laid out the ground sheet, pieced together the tent poles. He watched me for a moment, a flicker of surprise on his face. "You know your way around a tent, my dad," I said, my voice quiet. "A long time ago." He just nodded, accepting the small, clipped piece of my history without question. It was during the unfurling of the tent's rainfly that it happened. A sudden gust of wind caught the nylon, whipping it up like a sail. We both lunged for it at the same time. My hand landed on the fabric, and his hand landed squarely on top of mine. Heat, a sudden, shocking jolt of it, as if I'd touched a live wire. His hand was rough, calloused, but so incredibly warm. It dwarfed mine completely. Every nerve, ending from my fingertips to my shoulder, screamed. My breath hitched. The world narrowed to that single point of contact. His skin on my skin. It could have been a second. It could have been a minute. Time warped, stretched thin, and taut like a rubber band. He pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned. Sorry, he muttered, not looking at me. He busied himself with securing the fly to the tent stakes, his movements suddenly jerky and uncertain. I stood there, my hand tingling, my heart a frantic, trapped bird beating against my ribs. I could still feel the impression of his palm, the rough texture of his skin. It was branded onto me. My carefully constructed wall of detachment had been breached by a simple, accidental touch. The sun had fully set by the time we finished. A vast, star-dusted blanket was stretched over us, the likes of which I hadn't seen in years of city living. Mason built a fire with an expert efficiency that I couldn't help but admire. The crackle of the flames filled the silence, a comforting, living sound. He sat on a log, poking at the fire with a stick, the orange light carving sharp shadows onto his face. I saw the weariness in the set of his shoulders, the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes that his usual bravado always concealed. He wasn't just a loud, confident roommate. He was a man who worked hard, who got tired. You're really quiet, he said, his voice low. He didn't look at me, just kept his eyes on the flames. I know, I replied, my own voice barely a whisper. I don't think I've heard you say more than 10 words at a time since I moved in. He finally turned his head, and his gaze was direct, searching. Why is that? The question hung in the cool night air. How could I explain it? How could I tell him that his presence was so overwhelming, so bright, that it drove all my words back down my throat? That I was so terrified of him seeing the pathetic, longing truth in my eyes that I had opted for invisibility? I'm not much of a talker, I said, the lamest of excuses. He held my gaze for a second longer, then looked back at the fire. Fair enough. A comfortable silence settled again, but it felt different this time. Less like an absence and more like a shared space. He had asked. He had noticed my silence, and he had asked why. It was a small thing, but it felt monumental. It felt like he was seeing me, the real me, for the first time. Later, as the fire burned down to glowing embers, he got a strange look on his face. A mix of mischief and something else I couldn't quite decipher. He stood up and looked out at the lake. The moon was high now, a perfect silver coin that cast a shimmering path across the water. It was impossibly beautiful and achingly romantic. I dare you, he said, his voice a low rumble. I looked up at him, confused. Dare me to what? He turned, and the moonlight caught the glint in his eye. To go skinny dipping, my heart stopped. It literally just ceased to function for a full second before starting up again at a gallop. Of all the things he could have said, that was the last thing I expected. It was absurd. It was reckless. It was intimate. I must have looked horrified because he laughed. A soft, low chuckle, not his usual booming laugh. What, you scared? Yes. Terrified. Not of the water. Of you. It's cold, I said, grasping for a sane objection. It'll be fine. Good for the soul, he said, already unbuttoning his shirt. He pulled it off in one smooth motion, and my throat went dry. His chest and shoulders were even more defined in the moonlight, a sculpture of pale, living marble. My eyes traced the lines of his collarbones, the dark trail of hair that disappeared below the waistband of his jeans. I felt a dizzying, illicit thrill. He kicked off his boots, then shucked off his jeans and boxers without a hint of self-consciousness. He stood there for a moment, completely naked, a perfect silhouette against the shimmering water. He was beautiful, an achingly, painfully beautiful man. Your turn, he said, his voice gentle. This was it. A crossroads. I could retreat, make an excuse, go back to being the ghost in the corner. Or I could take a breath and step off the cliff. I could meet his dare. Some insane, self-destructive, hopeful part of me wanted to meet him there, in that vulnerable space. My hand was shaking as I unbuttoned my own shirt. It felt like I was peeling off a layer of skin, shedding the quiet, fearful person I had always been. My clothes pooled at my feet, and I stood, pale and trembling, in the cool night air. I had never felt so exposed in my entire life. He didn't mock me. He didn't even look at me with pity. He just watched me with an intensity that made my skin hum. Then he turned and walked into the water without a backward glance, as if he trusted I would follow. The water was a shock, a gasp-inducing, electrifying cold that stole my breath and made every inch of my skin tingle. I waded in after him, my teeth chattering. He was already further out, treading water in the center of the moon's path. He looked back at me, his head and shoulders dark shapes on the glittering surface. "See?" he called out, his voice echoing softly across the lake. "Not so bad." I swam out to him, my clumsy strokes feeling loud in the profound quiet. The cold was beginning to subside, replaced by a strange, numbing clarity. I stopped a few feet away from him, the water lapping gently at my chest. We were two people, alone in the universe, suspended between the stars above and their reflections below. "It's beautiful out here," I said, the words feeling inadequate. "Yeah," he said softly. He was looking at me, not at the sky or the trees, just at me. The moonlight silvered his wet hair and the water droplets on his shoulders. In his eyes, I saw something I had never seen before. Not confidence, not arrogance. Something fragile, something vulnerable. "Leo," he said, and the sound of my own name on his lips was a revelation. He'd never used it before. I was always man, or dude, or nothing at all. I didn't dare you to be an ass. I didn't know what to say. I just treaded water, my heart a heavy, rhythmic drum against my ribs. "I've been going crazy," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Living with you. In that apartment, my blood ran cold. Here it comes. The complaint. That you're too weird, you're too quiet, I need a new roommate speech. It's like, you're not even there," he continued, and his voice was thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "But you are. I feel you. In the quiet. It's so loud, your silence. Does that make any sense?" I could only nod, my throat tight. "I see you," he said, and he swam a little closer. We were only an arm's length apart now. I could see the confusion and the fear warring in his eyes. "I see you watching me when you think I'm not looking. And the crazy thing is, I find myself looking for it. Looking for you," my breath caught. This wasn't happening. This was a dream. A cold, beautiful, impossible dream. "I don't know what this is," he said, shaking his head slightly, water flying from his hair in silver arcs. "I've only ever been with women. It's all I've ever known. It's what everyone expects." He looked down at the dark water between us. "But then there's you. And you're just you. And I lie awake at night in my room, and I can feel you through the wall, and I just want to, I don't know, break it down." He looked up, and his eyes were glistening. With water? Or with tears? I couldn't tell. I'm not as straight as I thought I was, Leo. Maybe I never was. I think I'm in love with you." The world stopped spinning. The stars, the moon, the cold water, the whispering pines, it all dissolved into nothing. There was only his face, his words, hanging in the air like a prayer. He loved me. Mason, my loud, confident, impossible roommate, loved me. Before I could process it, before I could find a single word in the wreckage of my mind, he closed the small distance between us. His hand came up cold and wet and cupped my cheek. His thumb stroked my jaw, a gentle, questioning touch. And then he kissed me. It wasn't a frantic, passionate kiss. It was slow, hesitant. It was the taste of cold water and a confession. His lips were soft, searching. It was a question, and with a soft, broken sound in the back of my throat, I answered it. I leaned into him, my hand coming up to rest on his shoulder, feeling the solid, real muscle beneath my palm. The kiss deepened, becoming more certain, more sure. It was a discovery, a revelation in the cold, dark water, under the silent witness of the moon. It was the single most honest moment of my entire life. We broke apart, breathless. We just floated there, foreheads resting against each other, the water lapping around us. "Say something," he whispered, his voice ragged. I took a shaky breath, the cold air burning my lungs. "I thought I was invisible," I whispered back. He pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes. "You're the only thing I see." The morning was a brutal shock of sunlight and birdsong. I woke up warm, cocooned in my sleeping bag, my body humming with the memory of the night before. After the lake, we had stumbled back to the tent, cold and shivering, and fell into our separate sleeping bags. But the space between us was no longer a chasm. It was a thin, charged line of electricity. We hadn't spoken another word, but we didn't need to. The kiss had said everything. I turned my head. Mason's sleeping bag was empty. A cold dread, colder than the lake water, washed over me. I sat up, the nylon of the bag rustling loudly in the morning quiet. The tent flap was open. I scrambled out. He was by the dead campfire, already dressed, methodically packing away the cooking gear. He didn't look at me. His movements were stiff, efficient. The easy grace of the day before was gone, replaced by a rigid tension. "Morning," I said, my voice small. "Morning," he grunted, not turning around. The word was a slap. The warmth inside me curdled into ice. My hope, so new and fragile, shattered. It was a mistake, a moment of moonlit madness, a drunken confession without the alcohol. He regretted it. My mind began its familiar, frantic spiral. Of course he regretted it. He was confused. I was a momentary lapse in judgment, an experiment. Now, in the harsh light of day, he saw his error. He was disgusted. With me. With himself. The self-recrimination was a physical blow. I felt stupid, naive. How could I have believed him? How could I have let myself feel that soaring, impossible hope? I was a fool. The quiet, weirdo roommate who had taken advantage of a moment of weakness. I wanted to disappear, to crawl back into the tent and dematerialize. But there was nowhere to go. We were still miles from home, trapped in this beautiful, terrible place that had, only hours ago, felt like a paradise. I started to pack my own things, my movements clumsy, my hands shaking. The silence between us was a physical thing, a thick, suffocating blanket. It was 1,000 times worse than the silence in our apartment. That silence had been born of distance. This was born of intimacy, soured and broken. The drive back was agony. He turned the radio on, loud this time, a barrier of static and meaningless chatter. I stared out the window, but I didn't see the scenery. I saw his face in the water, his eyes full of a terrifying vulnerability. I heard his whispered confession. "I think I'm in love with you." Had I imagined it? Had the cold and the dark played tricks on my lonely, desperate mind? No. The kiss was real. I could still feel the ghost of it on my lips. That made it so much worse. When we got back to the apartment, the power was back on. The digital clock on a microwave blinked 12 o'clock, a taunting, mocking reset. Mason carried his gear inside, dropped it in the middle of the living room, and walked straight to his bedroom, closing the door behind him with a soft, final click. The sound echoed in the apartment like a gunshot. I was alone again, but my solitude, once a comfort, was now a punishment. The apartment felt huge, empty. Every quiet corner screamed his absence. I went to my room and lay on my bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. The beige walls I had once found soothing now felt like a prison. I had tasted color. I had felt the warmth of the sun. And now I was back in the gray, but the gray was no longer neutral. It was the color of loss. A day passed. Then 2. 24 hours of silence. 48 hours of him being a ghost and me being a wreck. I heard him leave for work in the morning. I heard him come home at night. The sound of his key in the lock made my heart seize with a painful mix of hope and dread. But he never came out of his room. The door stayed closed. I didn't eat. I barely slept. I just replayed the scene at the lake over and over in my head. The confession, the kiss, the cold dawn, his closed-off face, his closed door. I was drowning in the silence. On the evening of the second day, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. Even if it was the worst, I had to hear it from him. I had to be released from this limbo. I stood in front of his door, my hand raised to knock. My heart was a frantic drum solo in the quiet hallway. Just do it. Just knock. But my courage failed me. My hand dropped to my side. I was a coward. I had always been a coward. I turned to go back to my room, to surrender to the misery. Just as I turned, I heard the click of his doorknob. The door opened. Mason stood there, and he looked awful. He was pale. His eyes were red-rimmed. and there were dark circles under them that hadn't been there before. He looked like he hadn't slept any more than I had. We stood there for a long, silent moment, two ghosts in a hallway. "Leo," he said, his voice hoarse. He looked so lost. The confident, strong facade was completely gone. In its place was the same raw vulnerability I had seen in his eyes at the lake. My anger, my hurt, it all just evaporated, replaced by a wave of overwhelming empathy. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'm an idiot. I freaked out." He leaned his forehead against the doorframe, closing his eyes. "Everything I said at the lake. I'm in it. God, I'm in it so much it scared the hell out of me. Relief washed over me, so powerfully my knees felt weak. I had to grip the wall to steady myself." He meant it. "I've spent my whole life being one person," he continued, his voice ragged. "The guy who's good with his hands, who likes girls, who fits in. It was easy. And then I moved in here with you, and none of it felt real anymore. The only thing that felt real was this thing I felt whenever you were in the room. Or whenever you weren't in the room." He looked at me then, his eyes pleading. "Waking up that morning in the tent. The sun was out, and it was all real. It wasn't a dream. And I panicked. I didn't know how to be that person in the daylight. The person who's in love with his male roommate. So I ran. I hid. And I've spent the last 2 days feeling like I was suffocating." He took a hesitant step out of his room, into the hallway, into my space. "This is new for me, Leo. All of it. And it's terrifying. But being without you, even for 2 days in the same apartment, that's 100 times worse." The confession was a balm on my frayed nerves. He was scared. He wasn't disgusted. He was just as lost in this new territory as I was. "I was scared too," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "I thought you regretted it. I thought I was a mistake." "No," he said, his voice firm. He closed the remaining distance between us, his hands coming up to grip my arms, as if he needed to anchor himself. "No, you are the least mistaken thing that has ever happened to me." He searched my face, his gaze intense. Is it too late? Did I ruin it?" I shook my head, a single decisive movement. A wave of bravery, foreign and exhilarating, washed through me. I reached up and took his hand from my arm. His fingers were so much larger than mine, his palm rough against my own. I threaded my fingers through his. His breath hitched. His eyes dropped to our joined hands, then back to my face. It was a tangible act, a promise. We were standing in the hallway of our apartment, a place that had been a landscape of avoidance and distance, and we were holding hands. It was a public display of affection in the most private of worlds. A slow, hesitant smile touched his lips. It was a fragile thing, but it was real. "Okay," he breathed. "Okay." That night, he didn't go back to his room. After a long time, just standing in the hall, holding hands and breathing the same air, I led him to my room. It wasn't a seductive gesture. It was a practical one. My room was my sanctuary, and I was inviting him in. We lay on my narrow bed, on top of the covers, still fully clothed. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, and I lay on my side, facing him, my head propped on my hand. "I like your room," he said quietly. "It smells like books. And you—" I felt a blush creep up my neck. We talked for hours. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me about growing up in a small town, the pressure to be a certain kind of man. I told him about my quiet life, my love of words, my fear of the world outside my books. We were filling in the gaps, sketching in the details of the people we were, not just the roommates we had been. At some point, he reached out and tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear. His fingers brushed my temple, a feather-light touch that sent a shiver through my entire body. It was a gesture of such simple, profound tenderness. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. Real coffee, not the instant sludge I usually made. I walked into the kitchen and found Mason at the stove, a towel slung over his shoulder, pouring hot water into a French press. He was wearing a pair of my gray sweatpants. They were far too short on him, and an old t-shirt. He looked completely at home. He looked up when I entered, and his face broke into that smile. The real one. The one that made my heart feel like it was expanding in my chest. "Morning," he said. His voice was warm, easy. There was no anxiety, No record. Just a man making coffee for the person he loved. He handed me a mug. Our fingers brushed as I took it. This time, neither of us flinched. The contact was easy, natural. A small, simple current of warmth that passed between us. We stood by the window, sipping our coffee, watching the city wake up. The silence was comfortable, a shared space woven through with unspoken affection. My old, lonely routine was gone. In its place was this. Us. The change was gradual, and then all at once. His toothbrush appeared next to mine. His clothes started to mingle with mine in the laundry basket. We started sharing meals, not out of necessity, but out of a desire to be together. We'd cook together in our small kitchen, bumping hips and stealing taste from the spoon, a domestic dance I had only ever read about in books. One night, we were watching a movie on the couch. I was curled against his side, my head resting on his shoulder. His arm was wrapped around me, his hand resting on my waist. It felt so normal, so right, that the memory of my past loneliness felt like a story about someone else. He had been a disruption, a loud, chaotic force that had bulldozed the quiet, safe walls of my life. I had been so terrified of him, of the way he made me feel, of the desire he woke up in me. I thought that desire was a weakness, a flaw in my carefully constructed solitude. But I was wrong. He wasn't a disruption. He was a revelation. He didn't break my life. He broke it open. He forced me out of my beige prison and showed me a world of vibrant, terrifying, beautiful color. He taught me that bravery wasn't the absence of fear, but the act of reaching out in spite of it. I looked at him now, his face illuminated by the flickering light of the television. He was watching the screen, his expression relaxed, a small smile on his lips. This man, this impossible man, had seen me when I was invisible. He had heard me when I was silent. He had dared me to jump, and then he had jumped with me. My love for him was a quiet, steady flame, no longer a secret shame, but a source of warmth and light. He was the plot twist I never saw coming, the one that rewrote my entire story. I hadn't gone looking for love. I had built a fortress to keep it out. But love, it turned out, had a key, and it looked a lot like my loud, obnoxious, beautiful roommate. He must have felt my gaze, because he turned his head and looked down at me. He didn't say anything. He just leaned down and pressed a soft, gentle kiss to my forehead. A simple gesture, a promise, a new beginning. And in the quiet comfort of our shared living room, I knew, with a certainty that filled every corner of my being, that I was finally home.